Welcome back, everyone. Time for our final panel session of the day. We're talking driving innovation, technology and sustainability. Let me introduce you to our fantastic panel for this final session. My guests are Joanna Newman, the former VP Technology for the Americas at Vodafone, Tia Chang, Chief Product Officer at Nexus Digital Technology, and finally Andrea Ruotolo, Global Head Customer Sustainability and Responsible AI at Rockwell Automation. Hi to all of you, how are you?
Hi, doing excellent.
Good to see you. And Andrea, I understand that you are undertaking the bravest of brave acts, and that is going on a video call from a hotel room. So I admire your courage today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And as a hotel room connection goes, that is looking pretty good to me. Right, so much for us to discuss over the next half an hour to 40 minutes, because the link between technology and sustainability is enormous, but it's also critical for progress in the future. So let's start with a nice broad one. And Joanna, I'll start with you. How critical do you feel technology is to help tackle climate change and sustainability? How big a part does it have to play in that overall picture?
I think it's a very strong element for a successful address of challenges that are brought together from climate change. I mean, what gets measured gets done. Technology helps you measure it. Technology helps you understand what's causing it, and technology helps you address and measure performance improvements. So things like the scope protocols that came in place, of course, are introduced from a political and a regulatory perspective, but it's technology that measures that and gets it done. And I think it's quite critical for what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Tia, come to you next, please.
I think from my perspective, it's absolutely essential. If you look at the complexity of climate change and the need for kind of proper multivariate analysis, it's almost impossible to do that with sort of human calculation. So we absolutely need AI to be able to drive that out. And without the underlying models and then obviously the technology to be able to support that as well, from a compute perspective, it's not going to be achievable. And when it comes to climate change, there's a limited amount of time that we can continue to operate as we are without beginning to roll back the clock. So I don't think I don't think we are going to be able to tackle climate change without some technological innovations.
Andrea, if we can come to you last on this one, please.
Yes, absolutely. It's a must. And I would like to add, I absolutely agree with Joanna and Tia. And now we are going to end up building a sustainable future if we use that technology in a responsible way. And what do I mean by that? For example, we use smart devices to enable real-time monitoring and predictive analytics, which helps, for example, manufacturers and the industrial sector to improve their operational efficiency while minimizing their environmental impact. And we use a lot of AI to do that closed loop optimization of processes. But if that AI is not green AI, if it's consuming fossil fuels, right, to run and a lot of water in the process, then is the net positive? Right? Have we actually built a more or less sustainable future? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when implementing technology. Are we implementing it in a responsible way that will help us to build that sustainable future that we are seeking?
And AI is exactly where I want to take things next. Tia, you were the first, you brought that up quite heavily in your comments, so we'll start with you on this one. How critical is AI in this scenario for you? Is it the game changer we've been looking for to help us properly move the needle in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really is. If I think back to some of the other work that I've done earlier on in my career, we were looking at trying to map human genomes, and that would have taken decades to do manually. We then implemented AI and we managed to map the human genome in 2 years, which would have been completely impossible without that technology. Now, if we take those similar approaches and apply them to climate change en masse, multiple universities and academics all working on it together along with industry through public-private partnerships, I think that's absolutely a way to drive it out. But kind of echoing what Andrea said, we look at AI, we do need to think about the consumption of energy and the emission of carbon from those data centers. And so we need to be thinking about our AI in terms of optimization of those models so that we're not over consuming, though it will not only keep the costs down, but it will also keep the emissions down. And there are ways to get around this. Microsoft's data center policy now is to be carbon negative by 2030, and they're making real strides forward to help support organizations who are moving quite heavily into the data and AI space, whether that's through for sustainability or just their business processes as well.
Thank you. Andrea, if we can come to you next.
Yeah, so AI and IoT are transforming how we manage resources and reduce emissions. By integrating the two, we can create smart systems that analyze this vast amount of data to optimize production processes. So we need it. We need this technology to actually analyze information and to help us identify hotspots where we should be implementing projects, implementing technologies to help optimize processes and make those processes more efficient. So they play a significant role. And one thing that I want to bring to the table now is, yes, they do play a role in reducing environmental impact. We need to be careful, as we've been mentioning, on how is this technology powered. But at the same time, we need to take into consideration the S pillar of ESG, of the environmental, social, and governance metrics that we use for measuring our progress in sustainability. When we use these technologies, if we are having an impact on jobs, those are some metrics within the social pillar of ESG, then are we building a more or a less sustainable future? That's why I think it's absolutely critical that we look at sustainability from a holistic standpoint, not only the environmental pillar, but also we take into consideration the social and governance aspects. And we ensure that when we implement these technologies to drive environmental performance, we are not impacting, for example, the social pillar in a negative way.
Thank you. Joanna, if we can come to you last on that. Is it the game changer? Is it the thing that's really going to drive that innovation and accelerate progress? And I think you're just on mute at the moment.
Yes, AI has been used in networks like Vodafone's for many, many years to help us dimension traffic and reduce the cost of operating our network and reduce the cost of the energy that's consumed by our network. So meeting both sides of those goals while supporting the S pillar of ESG as well, by making sure that we have great connectivity in all of the areas in which we operate, or all the locales in which we operate and are regulated. So AI has already been helping us do this. And I think that what's interesting is that the pace of change and the rate of change and the art of the possible is getting bigger and faster for ways that we can use AI, be it from using something like a Copilot capability for software development to reduce the number of processes that are and optimize performance, to dimensioning a network, as I've already discussed, to using Gen AI to minimize the length of time that somebody spends on hold speaking to a call center. There are lots of ways that AI is actually beneficial with a return on sustainability. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. And I want to sort of pick up on what you were saying there in terms of those sort of smaller, well, they might seem like smaller examples which play a bigger part. What I'd love to do is get examples from all of you really about areas where you've seen technology used to really benefit sustainability. It could be the smallest example you like, it could be a huge example. It's entirely up to you. But it'd be remiss of me not to mine you all for your experience. Andrea, if we could start with you, what example would you bring to the table?
Yes, I love the example of digital twins, which are virtual replicas of physical systems. Digital twins can be used to simulate processes and identify inefficiencies before they manifest in the real world. And I think that's so powerful because we can test things out before we try them in the real world. And that is very helpful in reducing resources and in helping us test things out quite quickly. So in fact, organizations that are using digital twins have reported up to a 50% reduction in material waste. And I think that's very powerful. And we implement some of those digital twin solutions, and I can testify that the impact is real.
That's a wonderful example. Joanna, come to you next, please.
Yeah, so I've already spoken about some very discrete, very practical applications. So I want to speak more from a wider perspective now. So at telecoms companies like Vodafone, our responsibility is to not only operate a network and provide end user connectivity, but also to support enterprises that are looking to take advantage of these new technologies to bring scale and advantages and innovations to light. So be it as Andrea talked about, a manufacturing facility, or perhaps it is a pharmaceutical company that's using huge amounts of compute to help find new drugs, etc. It's really our responsibility as stewards to provide that capability and the tools for enterprises to actually be able to use and get started from step one and day one, and then make incremental gains on top of that.
Thank you, Joanna. Tia?
So I was quite impressed by the work that Google had done on their data center work to reduce carbon emissions by 40% through energy consumption. So they're working on using AI to ramp up and ramp down the power into those data centers to be able to optimize some of those, the consumption from AI models. Now, when we look at the AI space, not all models need to compute at top speed. It's how good is good enough. And so through the work they've been doing, they've been able to reduce the carbon emissions by 40%. And actually the work that they've done there is very replicable in businesses to think about how you can use these models to look at your power management across your business. So yes, you could use it, if you don't need your energy at night, or you don't necessarily need to have those servers running at full speed during the day. If they're on premise, you can use them in the same way.
Where I want to take things next is a question which I think's really evolved over the last few years, and that was, have we really disconnected the thought of technological progress means more power, more resources, more waste, more, and sustainability, the two not being able to coexist? That sort of question almost feels a bit daft now. A few years ago, it was totally valid. Joanna, do you feel those two issues have totally disconnected now? Are we able to view technology as a positive contributor to sustainability?
Yes, absolutely, because what we're doing is we're driving for more efficiency, more use cases that are driven through a higher efficiency. So as Tia just spoke about with the data centers and the resumption, the adjustment of power based on what it is that they're actually doing at that time with and using models to create those savings. The expectation is that the data center is running more efficiently than it would be at other times. So it's about providing more capabilities more efficiently with a net benefit from a sustainability perspective.
Tia?
Yes and no. So I agree with what Joanna's just said in terms of the use cases for larger capabilities, but I think we do still have challenges around what we do in the device space. So devices like mobile phones, IoT devices, they have very, very short lifespans. They're full of rare metals, the cobalt that needs mining. They're very exploitive of raw materials. In going back to the S in the ESG, there's a lot of problems in terms of supply chain that isn't necessarily transparent. And a lot of these devices now, if you look at your iPhone, you can't upgrade the battery on it. They're not repairable. And so they are, built for obsolescence after a year or two, and the same with your laptops and so on and so forth. And so, when I look at it from a consumeristic point of view, we still have big problems in the technology space. So whilst we can solve technology from an organizational business perspective and think of ESG in those sense, I think there's still a big way to go in terms of what we can do from the hardware perspective to move that down forward.
That's such an interesting discussion, because there's some organisations that make that a huge part of their selling point. I remember right back at the start of my career, I started working in an electrical store, and the rep from Miele came in and said, If you get someone to buy this vacuum, it'll be going for 20 years. I sold my parents one of those vacuums 20 years ago, and now I have it. It's still going. I won't tell you how old I am, but we'll move on quickly. Andrea, if we can come to you on that question there about separating the more aspect of technology, disconnecting that from sustainability.
Yes, for us to be successful in doing that, we need to redefine how we value corporations. And right now we are valuing corporations by only financial metrics. We are improving there. Now corporations have ESG commitments, sustainability commitments. And once we are able to integrate, that's just a thought. If we are able to integrate the current financial metrics, profit, and we integrate the ESG metrics and responsible AI, responsible technology metrics, and with bringing all of that together into a model that becomes our new economic model, I think that that's when we are going to be finally successful. Now we are making attempts, but we don't have an economy that supports that decoupling.
I'm going to pick up on threads there from all of you, really, to talk about optimizing resource use and cutting waste. You've also referred to various parts of that question over the last few minutes. Tia, if I could start with you, because you were talking about obsolescence there, which I think is a really important subject. How do you feel technology and technology companies can really optimize their resource use and cut waste? Does it need to be regulated? How do we go about that?
Yeah, so I think regulation is going to be a problem at the moment. So globally, across different regions, regulation is not standardized. Some areas are better than others. I think from a manufacturer and supplier perspective, they can be looking at things like buyback schemes. They can be looking at making sure that their products are upgradable, recyclable, maybe looking at product as a service, as an offering. Certainly Philips do it with their lighting devices. You lease them, you lease light bulbs rather than buy them, and then they take them back at the end of their life. And so, kind of building these concepts into your product offering and your product catalog is really useful. But I think also there's changes that need to happen in terms of sort of from a regulation perspective. And I think certainly from the UK, I think that's on the roadmap. Within the last couple of years, we've now been asked to start to declare our own carbon emissions as part of the, I think it's called ESCR, which tells you your total carbon emissions across all of your business, including your IT, your cloud, everything else, including the contracts you've got with vendors. And I think that's probably going to end up in a carbon taxing position for businesses to help kind of incentivize them to reduce that. But I think it's going to need to be a multi-pronged approach.
Andrea?
Yes, what Tia was talking about is absolutely right. The Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation is what is going to, in a way, nudge or let's say force corporations to integrate some of those non-obsolescence components, the recyclability of the products, even how corporations do marketing about their own products to avoid greenwashing. So at the end of the day, yes, we have amazing leaders all over the world looking to do what's right, but it's absolutely critical that regulators step up and they create rules of the game that are fair and standard across the board so that we can ensure that every single business is working towards building a sustainable future.
Yes, nudge is such a nice way of phrasing that, absolutely. Joanna, next to you, please.
Yes, when I think about AI regulations, there really is a global divide between regulations that are being provided in the Northern Hemisphere and regulations that are being created in some of the Southern Hemisphere. And there needs to be work by the standards bodies to really coordinate those, to have a consistent global approach that is respectful of the local geography and the local use cases, but also doesn't avoid exploitation as well. So that's something that the standards bodies and the regulators are working on together, and we can support those conversations by guiding them through various consortia and forums for how we think that it should be done. So in the UK, as Tia talked about, the ESCR is very well developed, and that's symptomatic of something that we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere with very well developed thoughts that are reflective of multi-year discussions, whereas in other parts of the world it's much more nascent. And so I think that as a technology community, we have a responsibility to help inform and move those conversations along, to ensure that we've got responsible use of AI that gives us a benefit from a sustainability perspective, but also for our wider social good. Thanks.
Well, let's move on to the global question here that we've all touched on in part here. There is a challenge here because there may be regulations in place in the States or over in Europe, which mean technology companies and providers have to work by those guardrails. They have to work by those areas where the other parts of the world, it might not be the case. It may give them a competitive advantage. How do we get, I know this is a hot potato question, but how do we get that balance right of wanting to stay competitive whilst making sure that we are sustainable and driving that innovation? Joanna, apologies, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Actually, this is a topic of conversation that I was having only last week in a standards body. And I think that we need to remember that there's a third party in the room. So we've talked about companies, we've talked about governments, we've talked about regulators, but there's a third vertical there, and that is really the vendors and providers. So very few organizations are actually creating their own LLMs, and their buying capabilities, not quite off the shelf, but you can. So the key component is to bring the vendors into the conversation as well. The vendors will obviously, and I'm talking about the Red Hats and the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, right? The vendors will have an outlook on how to deploy something responsibly across all the locations as well. So by driving that conversation with the regulatory bodies, which I just spoke about, driving that conversation with the vendors, you're much more likely to have a more even playing field. Now, competitive advantage, first movers sometimes have competitive advantage, but also second movers have a good competitive advantage as well. So it's about monitoring the market and making the most of the opportunity that's in front of you from an innovation perspective. The last point I'll make is that there is an opportunity for global organizations that work in differently regulated locales to try out things and explore. And when they find successes, take it back and suggest and provide the benefits as well to help drive that conversation forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Tia?
I think it's a complex one. I mean, certainly when we look at national carbon emissions, you do, with the carbon credit scheme, you do see a little bit of horse trading between one country selling their carbon credits to another. And I do see this kind of patchwork approach to regulation globally as an opportunity for organizations to just lift and shift their operations to an area where there is lower regulation, for example, and it's perhaps less impactful. I would hope that companies take a more ethical approach to these things and don't necessarily just think of bottom line, but take a very proactive approach to being involved in the shaping of that regulation. I think that would be really great. But there are definite risks around what that could possibly look like. But I do also think when we look at the global regulation, we also need to be mindful, looking at that kind of northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere divide, that most of the countries in the southern hemisphere tend to be more in the kind of developing world. And for them, they require a lot of those natural resources that we talked about earlier. And so they're exploiting them to kind of become a well-off country. But also they require industrialization. So their carbon emissions probably do need to be larger than ours in the northern hemisphere, where we're already developed. So there is perhaps a level of fairness that we need to have when we're considering these things as well.
Thank you, Tia. Andrea?
Europe is doing things right. The way they are setting up their regulations is not only for the companies that operate in Europe, but also if you want to sell to Europe, you need to comply with their regulations, with their policies. So I think that that's basically what's pushing companies all over the world to have to comply with these regulations. And let's not forget that as you comply with sustainability standards, what you're basically doing is optimizing the use of resources. So you're not only driving productivity, you're also driving sustainability at the same time. You're driving sustainability and you're driving productivity. You're driving efficiency by the implementation of these regulations. And global companies, when they identify a way to optimize their process processes for productivity and sustainability, normally they like to replicate that across other locations. So what I'm seeing is that we are going to have a domino effect, and I'm very grateful to Europe for enforcing these regulations, not only for companies that operate within their borders, but for companies that want to sell to them.
Where I want to go next is barriers, the challenges, the things that are the blockers that are stopping us making even more accelerated progress in the field of sustainability. Andrea, I'll start with you on this one. What do you feel those are? What are those big challenges? And we'll get on to what the solutions are in the next question.
Yes, one of the challenges that I discovered we have. So a year and a half ago, I launched the first leadership working group in the world looking at integrating responsible AI governance metrics within the ESG framework. And I was looking for people to join this discussion. And when I was talking to 50 different organizations, the majority said this: oh, I have an expert in AI and I have an expert in sustainability, but I don't have people that know about both. So we use this experience, this opportunity to actually do some of the cross-pollination. But I think that it's absolutely critical we understand that we don't have many professionals in the world that have experience in these both mega trends that are converging, and that we need people to step up, and we need to give them those opportunities for education and understanding so that they can make the right decisions at the highest levels of their organizations.
I often ask questions on this sort of theme, and I've never heard that answer before. So that's a fascinating take on that. Thank you, Andrea. Joanna, if I can come to you next, please. Oh, you're on mute again.
Sorry, I have my small children at home, so I'm making sure that they don't interrupt accidentally.
Well, do they actually have an in-depth knowledge of sustainability?
There's a couple of practical challenges that the industry needs to solve around early IoT devices and being able to either extend the lifespan of them or to have an effective swap program so that they don't go into the waste. I mean, Thea and Andrea both talked about the social ramifications of mining for some of these rare chemicals and or rare elements that go into the manufacturing. And so I think that that's a tangible problem that we could look at as a group of companies to find ways to extend that lifespan. As well, Andrea is absolutely right. There aren't a lot of people in the AI and innovation and ESG space. And I think by running panels such as this to bring forth why this is such a critical juncture of those three elements will help widen interest in this very interesting space. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Tia.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those points. I think we're also struggling in terms of the initial upfront cost for investment is quite high. And then when you pair that with the likes of so if you're going to look at using IoT devices to gather all that data, there's a significant cost to that. But there are also implications around data privacy, data security, which make those sort of challenges even greater, both from a legal perspective, but also from a security perspective. And the costs on those begin to escalate. So there are quite practical blockers in the way that are causing problems there.
Thank you, Tia. And my final question really is what comes next? I'd love to hear from each of you about what you would like to see happen next in an ideal world to really continue to accelerate progress, the progress that we need to see. Tia, if I could start with you, if you could get out your crystal ball, what would that be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from my perspective, I spend a little bit of time at Westminster doing advisory work, and I would really like to see governments take a little bit more of a sort of front foot on the regulation. I'd like to see an extension of the stuff like the Paris Accords and kind of building on that. But I think there's lots that governments can do to help drive that innovation through tax credits and so on and so forth to help incentivize that. So there's some carrot there as well as stick. It shouldn't all just be on businesses to kind of drive sustainability and innovation in that space.
Thank you, Tia. Andrea?
Yes. Progress is progress only if it's sustainable And I believe we are going to build a sustainable future when we implement technology in a responsible way that takes into consideration people and planet while we are driving profit. This may sound like an obvious statement, but today we are having these thousands and thousands of implementations of AI, and people are not taking into consideration all these three different pillars that are absolutely critical to ensure that we are building a future that is not self-defeating.
Yeah, a key consideration. Joanna, I will give you the final word on this panel.
Thank you. So I'm an advisor at Mars, which is the largest urban innovation hub in North America, with thousands of innovative businesses there. And so similar to what Taya does speaking to Westminster, I speak to them about how to implement responsible AI in their paradigm and in their business plan and what they're trying to do. And so I think that there's an opportunity, absolutely, to provide tax credits and extension of the Paris Accord, as Tia said, but also to help spur that innovation that's going to come from small companies that are really today, you know, a couple of data science engineers, AI engineers, and sustainability experts to innovate and bring new solutions to light. And that really is the future here. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Joanna. Well, we are going to have to wrap things up there. We've covered a huge amount of ground, and as we all say, there is plenty more potential to make progress. We just need everyone to work together on it. So Joanna, Tia, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and closing the show here at Tech and AI Live New York.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.